I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, a post-mortem on our federal election. What a ride. What started out as an expected pounding of then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau by the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre ended up with a Liberal Party win for political novice Mark Carney, our new Prime Minister. Mind you, there were a few bumps along the way, or rather one big bump, President Trump. If you were writing a script that said, okay, out of the blue, an American president will take over the ballot question for a Canadian federal election, no one would believe you. But he did, by calling Canada his cherished 51st state. All of a sudden, we woke up, elbows up, and said, no way you're taking our water, no way you're dissolving what you call an artificial line and we call a border. No way you're going to bully Canada with threatened tariffs and penalties. And so the ballot question became which leader would be stronger in standing up to President Trump. While there'd be lots of finger pointing going forward, the people decided, Mark Carney. Whatever happened to the anticipated issues? Cost of living, inflation, housing, economic blues, all important, all real, but all put aside in the name of national pride. So very interesting. To help us understand the undercurrents and consequences of this federal election, we're joined by Rob Shaw, senior political correspondent for CHEK-TV. Rob had a front row seat as he covered the drama of this surprising election with his daily reporting insights. What does it all mean for Canada going forward? Back in a moment with Rob Shaw. Rob Shaw joins us now. And Rob, I want to start off by saying I really appreciated your general coverage of the election and all the things that were going on in this unexpected election.
Thank you.
You were excellent. So what was your biggest takeaway?
Well, it was fascinating to me to watch the way, once again, that Donald Trump has just sort of upended our political system. And I see it play out provincially all the time, where a government is so focused on Trump that all the other issues that concern people, real legitimate concerns, healthcare, affordability, housing, they kind of just get overwhelmed. And that was the incredible story of the federal election, that Trump took away from the federal Conservatives winning issues that especially played very well in British Columbia, the addictions crisis, the emphasis that they had placed on that, and then also allowed Mark Carney to really reset from Justin Trudeau's kind of hole that he had left him in and dig himself out of that hole, both with his kind of new charisma. I'm not sure if charisma and Mark Carney is the right word, but it gave him momentum to get out of that hole. And so it just upended what would have been a completely... There's an alternate universe out there where there was no Donald Trump, and it's a completely different election, I think.
Yeah, I don't think Carney would have won without Trump.
I don't know. You tend to think not, because the government has reached its kind of best before date. You know, that 10-year rollover that governments typically have, the baggage becomes too much, and everyone thought that about the Liberals, and yet, here we are.
But I think that Trump actually almost saved Trudeau. If Trudeau hadn't resigned exactly when he did, Trump became such an issue that I think he might have saved Trudeau.
Trudeau looked very statesmanlike for a while there.
He saved Eby.
Right.
You know, I mean, there were all these players that, because the focus, as you say, went away from the real issues and just concentrated on that, it saved a lot of people. Another irony, I thought, was the way Poilievre decided from the summer to take all of his powerful money and ads and focus it on bringing sort of disrepute to Trudeau and also to undermine Singh. Mm-hmm. And those ads were very successful.
Too successful.
Too successful. So as a result, he did away with the two people he needed to run against.
Yeah, I mean, if that's absolutely right. And if we had a federal election at the scheduled date, which was October, it would have been a completely different outcome as well. But that pressure, getting rid of Trudeau, Carney coming in, doing the smart thing of calling an early election when you're the new leader, you've got momentum on your side, you don't have to kind of carry the baggage yet, and you just launch out as the change candidate. Carney became the change candidate within a government that was already tired, which was fascinating. And I think a little bit with the Conservatives, you saw the chickens come home to roost a little bit on the way that they had treated some of their provincial counterparts. I was talking to the BC Conservatives who were telling me in the provincial election, they would get calls from the federal Conservatives saying, you are an embarrassment to the Conservative brand. Like,
really?
We're not putting Poilievre up to endorse you. We're staying out of this. And they did quite well. And at the end of the federal election, the Conservatives were calling the BC Conservatives and saying, can you give us a hand? Can your MLAs endorse us? And John Rustad did at the very last minute put out a big plea to BC Conservatives to get behind them. But the Ontario Conservatives, the Doug Ford government, having a public war during the election with the federal party. So I think there was a little bit of arrogance that came when Poilievre thought he was going to win. And that treatment from Nova Scotia to Ontario to BC didn't do him any favors when the race got very tight.
Yeah, I think it's called friendly fire.
That's right. Yeah.
Especially when Corey tonight, I mean, he just went after. He really decimated Poilievre.
And everyone has their own motives in politics. Everyone's grinding an axe. But there was a feeling like that movement wasn't quite united provincially and federally, and that may have led to some fractures there.
Yeah, and so it's quite interesting because the Premier of Nova Scotia has spoken up, and of course Premier Ford has spoken up. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays. I wonder how you, since we're both in the media, how did you feel about the way Poilievre's team decided to handle the media?
It's interesting because I think they are on the sort of leading edge of where, unfortunately, everyone is going to end up. There was no sort of national tour for the media. I think the days of provincial tours for the media are over. The very selective focus on new age media emphasis for questions is something that all parties are going to emulate provincially and federally. They're already heading towards there. It was the extra step of hostility, the outright hostility, the outright mocking that had they not done that, they may have had a cutthroat but successful media strategy. And unfortunately, they had a cutthroat but just too aggressive kind of. I don't think people, we think of that Apple example, for example, of Poilievre chewing the apple and kind of berating that reporter in the Okanagan. It played well to people who were already going to vote Conservative. There he is attacking the stupid lamestream media, batting back questions, mocking them. But to ordinary voters who see that, it's aggressive, it's condescending, it's unnecessary. And so at the moment, it appeared to be a success. And by the end, I think it became a liability. And that strategy didn't work so well for them.
One thing I didn't like was the clampdown on all of the candidates who couldn't really speak up. And you sort of think, I get it, because look at what happened to John Rustad. There he is out talking about real issues, and he'd be blindsided by a comment from this candidate or that. And so I can see why they did the strategy, but it doesn't work for me in the media, but I don't think it works for people not to hear their own candidates say what they're thinking.
It's really interesting because all parties, I talked to all parties in the main three parties, the NDP, Liberals, and Conservatives, and they all said, we get it. We get why the Conservatives are skipping the all candidates debates. They view most people who are already there at those debates in the audience to have made up their mind already. They think that they are incredible time sinks away from the door because you got to prepare. And one stupid comment, one comment taken out of context, half of a comment put up in social media, completely misrepresenting what you can do or what you say, sidelines an entire news cycle and an election that can be very close. So I in the media, and I think a lot of people want to see their candidates at all candidates debates, but the party strategists, regardless of stripe, would prefer not. And the Conservatives have just made that calculation. I can see other parties slowly moving towards that if they see an advantage to it.
It's really depressing.
It is. It's also as depressing as thinking like the candidate doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
If you look at, the Abbotsford riding where Mike de Jong was running as the independent, who came in a distant third and lost to a Conservative candidate who didn't do a single interview, didn't attend any public events, didn't go to any all candidates debates, may as well have been a ghost and still walked away with that riding. It reminds you that in a lot of cases, unfortunately, the candidate doesn't matter. That people vote for a party, they vote for a brand, they vote for change or not, they vote for a leader. They don't even know who their local candidate is. And that's a really sad, depressing comment. But when you talk to party strategists, they will tell you that. They will say, we could run an inanimate carbon rod in this riding and still win. And that's really unfortunate. But a lot of people, that's how they vote.
Here, I thought this is maybe an aberration, but you're saying this might be a pattern for all the parties.
If you don't put your candidate up, but you have that candidate in the right party at the right time, they walk away with the vote, and having said nothing, they've created no controversy and they still win. I mean, I think, and I've argued this provincially, because the provincial government gives money to the parties now on a per vote subsidy, and they pay half of their election expenses. If you're going to put taxpayer money into political parties in election campaigns, you should demand a level of public accountability, at least one all candidates debate. If you're going to collect public funds, be in the public. I don't know if that argument works federally, but provincially, I think that should be part of the agreement. Public money, public transparency. I
also didn't like the fact that powers that be in Ottawa just came and imposed candidates even when someone like Mike de Jong had been, Mike de Jong had actually been working for about 2 years in that riding, and he'd had all those years in government. I was in government with him. And I think that really undermines people's trust in the system. We're going to be back in a minute and talk about, okay, we've got the lay of the land. What's it going to look like going forward? Rob Shaw joins us again to continue our conversation. So the election is done. It's a minority, which is a surprise to even some Liberals, I think. What is the play going forward for Poilievre? Like, is it guaranteed that he stays as leader?
Well, he seems to have paved the way for a by-election. He's got an MP to resign so he can run in Alberta. And he certainly is making a play to stay. I'm sure there will be pressure within that party to put a more, I won't say extreme, but more ideologically right, if you can believe that, leader for that party. There will be those who interpret the results as we just weren't hard enough on the right.
They weren't right enough?
They weren't right enough. And that is the danger, because I think in reality, they were a little bit too far, right? All the votes are in the center. You have to kind of come back into the center to try and pick up the undecided voter. So it looks like he's going to stay on. They did gain 20 some odd seats. Like they did very well, the highest popular vote share in a couple decades. But in politics these days, it's kind of a one and done. You get one shot, and then unless you put extraordinary effort into it, your party sends you out. They have cycled through a lot of leaders recently in the Conservatives, so maybe that'll factor into him staying. But
in part because they had adopted the electoral reform idea that the caucus does have a say.
Yeah.
The Liberals obviously didn't have a caucus that had a say.
Not until the very, very end when it became too much did Trudeau survive so many. When you think of Trudeau, like when you back away 20 years from Justin Trudeau, he may end up being the guy who, saved the Liberal Party when he became leader, ignited that Trudeau mania, got them into a series of governments, and then left at just the right time to hand off another term. He may not look quite as bad as he does now, but
he may
look worse. He may look worse. We'll have to see what Mark Carney does. I think he's got at least a couple years.
So Mark Carney at least has said right away he's not playing games with this by-election. He'll do it rapidly. So Mr. Poilievre will be in Parliament. So how do you think that's going to look? Because Poilievre, I can't see him changing his bombastic style and sort of blasting away. And I don't think that that's going to be Prime Minister Carney's response.
No, but again, the wild card is Trump, right? If you remove Trump from the equation, let's say Carney and Trump develop a new trade agreement and the tariffs are off the table, then you're back to issues where you can be bombastic. The overdose crisis, the lack of housing being built, the healthcare, like you can really attack the government on that because they have a record and has not got any better. But we are in a weird moment where the public wants a sort of a unity, country first at this moment, and attacking the prime minister with the vitriol that Poilievre usually uses on Trump. I don't think is going to play very well. So he'll have to pick and choose his battles there.
Of course, I'm biased because I have to say that my way in the legislature of handling people who were doing rude questions and being bombastic at me, I would just sit there and look, somewhere in this question there's a seed of an issue, and then I would grab that issue and then I would bore everybody to death by just talking about facts and figures and this and that, and they went, oh my gosh, forget her.
Adrian Dix carries that strategy on to this day.
So we'll see how that plays, because Mr. Poilievre has had this personality and this approach for many, many years.
Yeah, and it'll depend on what Mark Carney does and how he does it. And he's already talked about his first 100 days and some of his priorities there. And the domestic agenda is where Poilievre can really go after him.
So let's look at this issue that you brought up, and that is Canada more divided afterwards, or are we just seeing it through a momentary Trump eye?
Well, when you look at British Columbia, for example, we're incredibly divided. The electoral map federally looks almost identical to the electoral map provincially. Rural-urban split, right? Outside of Metro Vancouver and Victoria, one party dominates. The Conservatives hold all of the seats except for Kelowna. They've come down part of the island. And then the Liberals, or in the case provincially, the New Democrats, they are the urban center party. And then you end up fighting it out for just a few swing ridings here and there that hold the balance of power. And that divide is only getting worse. And it's changing too, because the Conservatives, provincially and federally, are picking up what used to be the base of the New Democrats: young, working class, blue collar, mill town, unionized, former kind of foundational New Democrat members who are angry, and they're going to the Conservatives. And the New Democrats or the Liberals are picking up the kind of like urbanites. And so that divide in this province is entrenching and should be worrying to both parties, because you are stuck in a perpetual tie, fighting over 2 or 3 random Metro Vancouver ridings that might flip, and putting all your resources in it. And also it's 2 very different ways of life, that a government that only represents one half of the province can't see the other half. They have no representatives there. They don't understand the issues. They don't. They run a little bit blind on big parts of the provincial life, and so that leads to that disconnect as well.
Well, that also brings up the question of the NDP future, because when there were 3 parties, it wasn't quite so black and white as what we're seeing now. NDP ever come back from this?
I think so. I think people don't like a 2-party system. They like to have that extra option, right? Even that release valve. And the New Democrats, if they go to ground and really go back to kind of grassroots and get back to working class, they may be able to kind of chip away at the Conservatives a little bit. But I think there'll be a role. They're not official party status. They have no leader. They don't want an election anytime soon. So in the interim, they're going to be stuck between supporting Carney but not wanting to get too close to him and not wanting to get tied to, like they did last time, propping the government up at their own expense. But with the right leader and the right message, I think they have a future.
What about the East-West divide? Because I see that in Alberta, the Alberta Project is, they said they signed 100,000 people in the last week or so, talking about wanting a referendum. That's all they want. Let's at least ask the question. Does it have life?
Well, Alberta maybe, but not in British Columbia. Like we don't seem to have that. And I think the hope from Carney is that if we do create the kind of energy corridors that he's envisioning, if we do bring bring British Columbia into line, because I'm not sure where British Columbia is, but if we do find a way to get things to Tidewater, to move our products to export, that the Western provinces don't feel so alienated anymore, David Eby has a tough task because he's going to face that pressure for more pipelines through Alberta to satisfy Alberta, to our coast, more natural gas, more critical minerals, and he's going to have to decide how much of that he can support electorally, how much his own party is going to support it, how much of the national agenda he wants to get behind, how much it benefits Alberta. There are a lot of interesting sort of collision courses that begin to appear when you look at the national Alberta kind of BC framework.
And I think it's interesting to try and figure out, I know what they all say during an election, but what they'll actually do, because Mr. Carney is certainly one of the biggest climate change activists. He did it for the UN, and he certainly did it setting up a bank where banks had to show that they had climate change policies. How does he put that together with pipelines?
I think the climate agenda has taken a major backseat, and provincially and federally, in the name of growing the economy to respond to Trump. And a recognition, if you look at the BC government in the last month, we're not going to hit our climate targets, has been their announcement. We've made almost no progress on our climate targets. We're getting rid of EV rebates, and we are kind of removing or watering down the environmental assessment process in the name of expediency. And so suddenly you begin to have a shift in emphasis to getting stuff done, growing the economy. It would be great if the projects are clean, but also we know we need non-clean projects as well. We need to move gas and oil to the coast, and that is an interesting future.
Thank you, Rob. I always appreciate your insights and comments.
Thank you for having me on.
We'll be back in just a moment. So here we are, a new, never-before-elected Liberal Prime Minister leading a minority government, the NDP decimated across the country, a Conservative leader who lost his own seat after 20 years in Parliament, and a separatist party from Quebec who could have great influence going forward. Or not. You can't say Canadian politics is boring. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.